of water filters. Most of them are going to work either by chemically sterilizing the water or physically removing things from the water. The Sawyer filters are really popular because they are, especially if you get these little ones, they're super lightweight and easy to throw into your bag. This is going to take out bacteria, protozoa, debris. It will not take out viruses and it will not take out chemicals. But this is a really great way to at least make sure that stagnant water doesn't have things living in it and doesn't take a lot to throw it in your pack. This is my #1 recommendation as an alternative to a life straw. Have you guys seen life straws? So that's a really cool tech, but you're limited to either lying on your stomach and drinking directly out of a stream or filling up a cup and then drinking through a straw. I just think it's a little bit annoying to have to suck that hard to get water. This you can use the exact same way, but you can also use it to filter clean water into a water bottle, which you can then drink normally or use for cooking. Boiling your water obviously is a great thing to do if you have the skills to build a fire and you have a vessel to boil it in. So that would be a good alternative to this also. Uses ultraviolet light to sterilize water. That kills viruses also. If you're traveling internationally, this can be really nice because we aren't used to the viruses in other countries. It does take batteries though, and so that's something that you'd need to plan into your kit, is if you have the power to use it. Then this is kind of a cool thing also. It's a water bottle with a, like coffee presses, where you just kind of press it down. This basically does the same thing to your water, except instead of pressing coffee grounds out, it's getting rid of your bacteria, viruses, chemicals. This has a carbon element into the filter, and that helps absorb toxins that might be in the water. This is kind of clunky for everyday use, but again, internationally, this is kind of neat. Or if you think that there's a good chance you might be drinking farmland water. I wouldn't plan on doing that, but if you are in that area, this can be a kind of neat thing to do for that. Extra clothes, you check your weather forecast. If there's any chance of rain, bring a poncho, bring a rain jacket. If there's any chance of a storm moving through and the temperature's dropping severely, you want to bring a coat even if you're sweating at the time. Those extra clothes are also going to be potentially your insulation for overnight staying. It's not practical to bring a sleeping bag out with you every time you go hiking, but it is practical to bring a puffy jacket and a poncho. That's a pretty easy thing to throw into your day pack. Your extra clothes are also something to change into if you get wet. Being wet drops your temperature a lot, so even if it's fairly warm outside, you can still get hypothermia. So staying dry, staying warm, important things. And those layers can also help with sun protection. Lights button up, you can always throw over yourself. It might be a little bit hotter, but compared to being massively sunburned, a little bit of extra sweat is a pretty nice alternative. So those were the 10 essentials. We had a navigation, lighting, sun protection, first aid, knife. Oh, I skipped fire. You guys know all about fire. Basically, you want to bring weatherproof matches, a lighter, a sparker, and then have the skill and practice at making fires, both from ideal circumstances, but also if you're dealing with wet wood. Birch bark is a really great fire starter if you ever see that out in the wilderness. Bringing a little puck of a long burning fuel can be great for drying wood out and getting a fire going for a longer period of time. Okay, so we've got fire, shelter, extra food, extra water, extra clothes. We talked about insects. The last couple of things that I want to talk about, we kind of started with it with navigation. Do you guys all have cell phones for the most part? Having your cell phone out in the wilderness is both a blessing and a curse. It's really nice to get outside and kind of separate yourself from technology, but at the same time, having that with you is just a really great tool, whether it's to look at a map or if it's to call someone and let them know you're running late so they don't have to call out the armed forces to look for you, or if you are in trouble, for calling them and letting them know. Cell phone coverage is getting better and better, but if you are ever doing remote hunting trips, camping trips, bushwhacking trips, getting a satellite communicator can be a worthwhile investment. That uses the Iridium satellite network to send text or voice messages out, so that you can still make communications even if you're out of range. Most of those also have an SOS button that will link up with whatever regional rescue force is in the area, so that if you do break a leg or have a heart attack, hopefully you guys aren't having heart attacks yet, but any sort of thing where you're trapped or injured or sick, that can get you out. They usually have a response time in under 24 hours, and is a really nice fail-safe to have. And then lastly, having the power source to fuel any of those electronic devices that you're relying on. The nice thing about a map and a compass is that it can't run out of power, and a lot of people will say that to use your phone for that is silly, but also consider that your phone is less likely to get wet and fall apart. If it gets rained on lightly, it's not going to end the day, and it has a lot easier learning curve for using it. But carrying an extra battery with you will let you use that for a long period of time instead of just carrying a heavy brick around with you. Oh, snakes, I would say if you're ever hiking in snakes, just make sure you're not listening to things with headphones on. Keeping an ear out for rattlers can be the difference between stepping on something that you shouldn't and stepping safely around. No trace. When we are out enjoying the environment, whether that is our primary reason for being out there, or if you're in a survival situation, it's really important to be good stewards of the land that we're using. It is not renewable, and if we pollute it, if we damage it, if we destroy it, it's not going to be there, or it's going to take years to recover. The most important things are, if you're starting a fire, if you're using a stove, you've got to have a plan for if that fire spreads, whether that's having extra water available to douse it with, preparing ahead of time, clearing leaves around the area, and most importantly, not leaving it unattended, especially in windy conditions. Or if it's very windy, considering not starting one at all. If the plants around it are dry, that can be a devastating thing to happen. When I was out west a couple years ago, there was a ton of fires on the west coast, and one of the ones in the area I was in was started because some kids set off fireworks, and it was incredibly dry, and it caused acres and acres of huge damage. It damaged people's homes and businesses as it spread into town. So being a responsible user of your tools is incredibly important. The other thing that is good to consider is managing your waste. It is really gross to be walking around and seeing someone's toilet paper or someone's poop on trail or near trail. And if you don't bury it deep enough, animals are going to dig it up, because animals like gross things. And so burying your waste in a cat hole that's 6 inches deep, covering it up well. A lot of hikers will mix dirt in with your poop to help it decompose faster. And if you leave a little bit of sticking up, that helps future hikers not dig up in the exact same area. When you are getting water, if you're setting up camp, being aware of the plant life around that area so that you're not causing erosion. A lot of plants near water, or if you're ever up in mountainous areas, are extremely fragile, and stepping on them too much can just really destroy the population. Shelter building too, doing that in an area where you're not destroying an animal's habitat. Iowa, we don't have a ton of endangered things. You know, I wouldn't clear out a whole field of prairie, for example, because there might be some endangered plant species in that area, and there are animals that rely on that for their habitat. The forests in Iowa, I think, are pretty safe to play around with, but just something to be aware of. This is my favorite poop trowel. It only weighs 2 ounces, and it's called the Deuce of Spades. So you guys can feel free to laugh at that awesome pun. Thank you. Thank you.
We do that. A lot of us lost power this past weekend with the ice. What do you have that would help in that type of situation? Like for staying warm in a house that's progressively getting colder.
A lot of that, there's 2 ways that you can go, producing extra heat or adding layers. Sleeping bags, coats, emergency blankets can all be good at holding that heat in. One of the things I tell campers a lot, once you get cold, it's really hard to get warm again. And your layers are only trapping heat that you produce in with you. It's not actually keeping you warm, or it is keeping you warm, but it's not producing the heat. So one of the best things you can do if you feel chilly is to do some jumping jacks, do some push-ups, do some sit-ups, and generate that heat so that you can then insulate that in. We do have, there are gas-operated heaters that are safe to use indoors. Depending on your house, that may or may not be a safe option. If you have pets that are very curious, for example, you probably don't want to set up a space heater that they may knock over. If you have a gas stove, drinking hot beverages, eating hot food is a really great thing to do. If you don't have a gas stove, it might be worthwhile getting a camping stove to have in case of emergencies, to make a hot water bottle that you can hang on to make some soup, to make some coffee or tea or hot chocolate. And the stove fuel that most people have around, you know, there's stoves that use sticks, where you're basically just building a little bit of fire. You're not going to want to do that indoors, but if you went outside, you would be able to do some cooking. A lot of these things you don't want to use indoors unless you have good ventilation, because they are going to consume oxygen and you could potentially suffocate. And so you want to be careful about that. Alcohol stove. This, in a pinch, you could use rubbing alcohol to fuel. Usually you would use denatured alcohol or, what's that fuel additive called? Heat, that you can get at the gas station, you can use on these stoves, and that you're basically igniting the vapors from that alcohol rising up. And then the stoves that are easiest to use, you would just keep some of these fuel canisters on hand, and then this is just as easy as turning fuel on and pushing a button. And then again, probably hot water bottles is one of the easiest safe things that you can do to add extra heat to what you're doing. Body heat is amazing, so if you and your friends and or family just make a big cuddle puddle, that's a great way to stay warm, and choosing one room that your bodies are working on heating instead of spreading out into different rooms. If you don't want to actually physically touch each other, just sharing a small room together can be a great way to stay safe. The white gas stoves that we have are really powerful and are really great in winter situations. Some of these stoves, if you're getting into the minus temperatures, which hopefully your houses aren't getting to if you lose power, stop performing well. This is a something you could use white gas or kerosene. In a pinch, you could use unleaded gasoline. It is not safe to use inside. When you prime it, it often has a kind of a fireball explosion, which you don't want to use around flammable things. But again, getting hot liquids and foods into your body can be really useful. It's to keep on hand. I'd say especially in a car, if you have a breakdown. It is not a cozy blanket, but the metallic lining helps reflect heat back to you. And that also provides a wind barrier if you're outdoors, and a moisture barrier if you're in inclement weather. So wrapping something like that around yourself can do a lot to maintain your temperature. If you get too hot and you're sweating, again, that can put you in a dangerous situation where you're then wet, and that leaves you vulnerable to getting cold again. So something to use with caution, but useful. And then these Mylar blankets and bags, I'm not going to unfold this because it's hard to refold, but these are even smaller, easier things just to keep on hand. You see a lot of runners after races having those space blankets around themselves, just as an easy way to stay warm post-activity. And this is one of those bivvies I was talking about earlier. Basically, a blanket like this with a hood on it, so that you can stay warm and dry. Oh, the other thing, for power outages, there's a lot of really cool solar technology. Cloudy days, it doesn't really help that much, so being prepared in keeping your batteries charged ahead of time is important. Panels, if you do lose power, this isn't going to charge super fast, especially on a cloudy day, but it does give you something that generates a good amount of light. It's not going to keep you warm, but at least something that helps you see what you're doing.
Based on our experience out in the woods on Friday, what items would you say would be very beneficial for where we were at?
Mylar blanket.
Camp stove.
The camp stove would be nice.
Really easy stove to make is made out of a cat food can, just like the little Fancy Feast ones. And that's a really fast, easy, lightweight stove option. And if anyone has a cat, it's a pretty easy, cheap way to put one together. And then that, it's a very similar stove if you're making it own, in that when you put your pot on top of the can, there's holes around the edge, and the presence of a can on top pressurizes it, and that causes fuel, or not fuel, but vapors and the flames to shoot out of these little holes, and then you get heat around that center part on the pot. All you need is cat food cans and a hole puncher, and even different shapes work. I think the one that I used had stars. I had a backup one with hearts on it, but circles work well too. But there's a lot of really fun to make, easy to make, and also challenging to make your own gear things out there. And I think the alcohol stove is one of the most useful things that you can do without investing hardly any money.